Yo, what's up, nerds? It's me, MTG Man, looking to finish off the rest of the Foundation spoilers. There's like 60 cards or so I think we should just get into it. Um, First off, Starlight Snare. If I understand it correctly, I think this was an arena card that they reprinted, but don't quote me on that. Um, I could be thinking of something else. But when it enters, tap enchanted creature, and enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. I'm gonna give this a 1. I don't see a good place for this. Especially, like, we keep getting cards like Witness Protection, and I think the one that turns things into dolls, where it takes away all abilities. Because, sure, tapping something is okay, they can't attack and they can't activate tap abilities, but it really doesn't shut down a creature as much as you would want it to, so I'm just gonna give it a 1. Y'all don't get to see calculator, alright? Um, Sylvan Scavenging. 1 green green. At the beginning of your end step, choose 1. You either put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, or create a 3/3 raccoon if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. I like this a lot. I feel like this could add up over time. If you play this in something like, I think it's Grumgully, who, whenever a non-human enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So as long as you have a 4 power creature, you'll create the first raccoon, and then that raccoon will enter with a +1/+1 counter, so it'll also be a 4/4. So then, unless your opponent board wipes, you'll have a 4/4 even if they remove the first 4/4. I'm gonna give this like a 3, just because I can see a use for it, but it doesn't feel as strong as I would want it to be. 1 counter really isn't that good if you don't have a creature with power 4 or greater. And a 3/3 raccoon every turn could add up, but I'm just not always too sure. Um, Twinblade Blessing, 1 white white, flash, enchanted creature as double strike. There's definitely some sort of deck for this, maybe like Light Paws. Um, the fact it has flash, I think, makes it better. I'm gonna give it a 3. I think double strike is honestly a really good ability either way. And just 3 for double strike isn't really that bad, especially, I don't know what the usual rate for that is, but yeah, I'm just gonna give it a 3. Ashroot Animist, 2 red green, trample 4/4. When it attacks another target creature you control gains trample and +X until end of turn, where X is its power. So it attacks and it gives another creature +4/+4 and trample. I think this could be good if you have some sort of big commander that is swinging in that doesn't already have trample. It could be a good way to give your commander trample. Um, but I'm honestly not too impressed. I'm gonna give it a 2 because I could see a place for it, but I just don't. If I want to give my whole board trample, I'm giving it like Dusk Shell Crawler or whatever. It's gonna give all my creatures with +1/+1 counters trample. If I want to play an ability to make my board bigger, I'm playing an overrun effect. I'm not playing Ashroot Animist, which is only going to pump 1 creature. Um, Battlesong Berserker. 3 in a red for a 3/4. When it attacks, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and menace. This is a 1. I don't see a place for it except a Berserker typal deck. Because I know there is a commander for Berserkers, if I remember correctly. So maybe just there. Big Fin Bouncer. It's a shark pirate, 3 and a blue for a 3/2. When it enters, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. Um, I'm gonna give it a 1. I think there's a handful of cards with this kind of ability in Commander, and I don't really see any of them seeing play. Billowing Shriek Mass. 3 and a black for a 2/3 with flying. When it enters, mill 3, and it gets +2/+1 as long as there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard. I don't think milling 3 is really enough. Like, if you want to mill 3, you play Stitcher Supplier. You don't play a 4 mana 2/3. That could become a 4/4 if you have enough stuff. I'm just going to give it a 1, though, because it's kind of underwhelming. Cackling Prowler. Love the art on this one. That's freaky as shit. Ooh. Yeah. So 4 mana, 4/3, Ward 2. And at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Um, as much as I really like it, I'm not sure if that ability is quite worth it. Because at best, that's one creature, or that's one +1/+1 counter on your turn. I feel like that's something you want to be doing multiple times. If it was every time a creature dies, you got a counter, I could definitely see it having play, but since it's not, I'm just going to give it a 1. Sick art, though. Clinquant Sky Mage, 3 and a blue for a 1/1 with flying. When you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. I mentioned in a previous video that there's a blue octopus. I think it's the same cost, except it's a 2/2, same ability, but it doesn't have flying. And I would say this is just better than that, because flying is going to be nice to get in, and if you're able to draw a lot of cards, I think this could be a way to attack. I could also just see this going in, like, budget decks, because any budget deck that's drawing a bunch of cards, and that's, like, part of their thing, this could just be a way to win. So I'm gonna give it a 3. Yeah. Crypt Feaster, 3 and a black for a 3/4 menace. When this creature attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. I'm gonna give it a 1. It's just not... Oh, it becomes a 5/4 with menace. Ooh, it's just not that good. Elenda, Saint of Dusk, has lifelink, hexproof from instance. It's a 4 mana 4/4. The beginning, as long as your life total is greater than your starting life, it gets +1/+1 and has menace. It gets an additional +5/+5 as long as your life total is at least 10 greater than your starting life total. So if you are at 50 life, it's a 4 mana 10/10 lifelink menace hexproof from instance. I think hexproof from instance is actually pretty good to begin with, since there's a lot of instant speed removal. I'm gonna give this a 6. I don't know how strong it is, but I feel like it could do a fair bit, especially once it becomes a 10/10 with lifelink. You can just keep swinging in and getting higher and higher, to where your opponents will probably have to kill you with, like, infect or commander damage or a combo. So I'm just gonna give it a 6. Elvish Regrower, 2 green for a 4/3. When it enters, return target permanent from your graveyard to your hand. It's like a Reclamation Sage, but different. The fact it has to be a permanent kind of hurts it. I'm gonna give it a 2, because it's not terrible. It's just kind of overcosted. I mean, it's good for the stats, but I would say overcosted still. Exemplar of Light, 2 white for a 3/3 flyer. When you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. When you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on this creature, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. I'm gonna give this a 6. This is gonna give life gain decks an additional way to draw cards. Sure, it's only 1 draw per turn, but if you're able to draw on your opponent's turn, or you're able to gain life on your opponent's turn, this could be 4 cards a turn cycle. I mean, even if you just have a Blood Artist, and you're getting Blood Artist triggers, bam, that's a draw. Even if you have a life linker that you're blocking with, bam, that's a draw. So I think it's actually pretty solid. I'm going to give it about a 6. Felidar Savior, 3 and a white for a 2/3 lifelink. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 other creatures you control. I'm gonna give it a 1. I mean, you could flicker it, and it's... I mean, 2 counters is okay, but just doesn't feel like enough value. Yeah, so it's a 1. Next up is Fiendish Panda. So it's 2 white-black. Whenever you gain life, put a counter on it. It's a 3/2. When it dies, return another target non-bear creature card with mana value less than or equal to this creature's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. I really like this, partially just because I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh player, and it reminds me of Frenzied Panda, or like Gyaki Gaia Panda. I grew up playing Yu-Gi-Oh, so evil pandas, I like them. But honestly, the ability itself is pretty good. I mean, a non-bear creature, so you can't loop it or whatever, but I mean, so it starts with 3. So when it dies, you get a 3-drop creature back. I think that's good at very least. But if you're gaining life, you can just keep putting counters on it and getting, like a higher mana value creature back. And maybe you'd even be able to get back a creature that could reanimate Fiendish Panda for some sort of loop. Like if you had a Soul Warden out, you get back a... What's a creature that brings back another creature? Um, let's just say we have this imaginary creature that reanimates a creature when it enters. So Soul Warden triggers when that creature enters. That creature triggers, brings back Fiendish Panda. Then you have a second trigger on Soul Warden. So then you would gain 2 life. Fiendish Panda would go up to 5. And if you're able to sacrifice that creature that brought back Fiendish Panda, you could loop something like that. So I could see some sort of loop. I'm gonna give it a 5. I actually really like it. I think this is one of those cards where I'd have to wait and see how it shakes out, but it seems pretty solid. High Fae Trickster. 3 and a blue, flash flying. You may cast spells as though they had flash. This is, Vidalcan Orrery on a stick? This is Vidalcan Orrery on a stick. I'm gonna give this a 6, because Vidalcan Orrery is good. Being able to cast things out of turn order is generally good, especially if you're in a either green or white deck. I think white has Drum Bellower, and green has a bunch of ways to untap their lands on their end step and things like that. So this could just let you take extra turns if you have a way to untap your shit. Homunculus Horde. 3 and a blue. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a token that's a copy of this creature. Again, drawing a second card multiple times a turn cycle can be hard, but it's a token copy of this creature. So you draw 2 cards on your turn, now you have 2 of them. Then you draw 2 cards on your opponent's turn, then you have 4 of them. Back to your turn, you do it again, now you have 8 of them. So doubling can be pretty good. I'm just gonna put it at a 5. I think any deck that has the ability to draw cards like that could definitely, see use with it swarming the board, but it's definitely one of those things your deck has to be built to. Kaikar Zephyr Awakened. 2 white, blue, 3/4, flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you either create a 1/1 white spirit with flying, or you exile another target creature you control and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So you either flicker something, or you create a spirit. I think there is a lot of value here, especially because it just makes all of your... Every spell is not Ghostly Flicker. I was about to say Ephemerate, but not Ephemerate. Basically, you cast an opt, and then you also get to flicker, So all your small spells are also flickering your creatures. I think there's a lot of value to be gotten here, so I'm going to put it at an 8. I think that's actually really powerful, especially if you have the right kind of board state for that and the right build around. If you have creatures with strong ETBs, this could just be a consistent flicker, I think that's really solid. Leyline Axe, 4 mana. If it's in your opening hand, you begin the game with it. And equipped creature has +1/+1 and double strike and trample. And you can equip it for 3. So if you don't have it in your opening hand and you have to cast it, 4 mana for +1/+1, trample, double strike isn't terrible, but then you have to equip it for 3. I feel like that's kind of up in the air. I want to give it a 3, because I could definitely see artifact decks wanting this. The ability to start with an artifact, even if it's just to get your affinity count down or count up by 1, is good, but it's really hard to say how strong this is. So I would give it a 2.5, really. Raise the Past. 2 white, return all creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. I'm gonna give this a 7. So A, you have Lurrus decks. B, you have any of those utility creature decks. I think there's a lot of good creatures with mana value 2 or less. And just being able to bring them all back for 4 mana, I think is really solid. If you build your deck around this, it's going to be even better. I recently did a... It's in Dex. It's not in Dex, is it? It's probably just sitting around here somewhere. There we go. I recently did an Arabella deck. And not all of them, but there was a good amount of creatures in this deck with mana value 2 or less. So this is just a bring back everything from your graveyard for that deck. I think there's definitely a lot of solid things you can get back. Your Esper Sentinels, your Drannith Magistrates. Those are two great examples just in white. They're things that are going to be easily removed, but being able to get them back is going to be very impactful. Revenge of the Rats. Create a 1/1 black rat creature for each creature card in your graveyard. And it has flashback. So, good for rat decks, kind of. A lot of rat decks want rats with a certain name. They don't really care about rats in total, but there are other decks that do care about rats in total. So, definitely goes in rat decks. I want to give it a 4. Because we definitely have that place for it. But I'm not really too sure. I mean, it can go in other graveyard swarm decks. I'll just give it a 4 for now. I feel like it could get better, depending on if I can find a specific commander for it. Soul Shackled Zombie. 3 and a black for a 4/2. When it enters, exile up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard. If at least one creature card was exiled this way, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. I'm going to give it a 1. I mean, removal from the graveyard is kind of good, but it's just not worth it. Sower of Chaos, 3 and a red for a 4/3, pay 2 and a red, and make target creature can't block this turn. I guess there is some good in protecting your board by saying, oh, I can attack this player, and I can make their, Blightsteel Colossus unable to block or whatever. Whatever big creature you don't want to have kill your shit. Or if you're playing a deck with flyers, being able to say, oh, my opponent's one flyer can't block, could just lead to you winning the game, depending on the situation. So I think there is value to it, but it's very... even then, those are fringe cases. So I would probably put it at a 1.5. I don't think it's completely useless, but I really don't see that many decks for it. Sphinx of Forgotten Lore, 2 blue for a 3/3, flash flying. When it attacks, target instant or sorcery in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. I'm going to put this at a 5. I think being able to recast certain spells is going to be really impactful. The fact you still have to pay for it isn't perfect, but it has flying, so you're probably going to get to do this multiple times a game. And, I mean, if you flash it in, it's not really that terrible. You can hold up your mana for a counterspell, and if your opponents don't play anything counterspell worthy, you just play your Sphinx, and you have it for the next turn. It's not terrible. Squad Rallier. I thought this was Squad Railer, and I was like, damn, that's... Yeah. Squad Rallier. For 3 and a white, it's a 3/4, and you can pay 2 and a white. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature card with power 2 or less from among it and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Again, this is kind of... I had mentioned, I put together this Arabella deck that works with creatures with power 2 or less, so this would kind of fit in there. However, I just don't think it's good enough. Which Arabella does play a... It's a 1 mana... Oh, yeah, there it is. Recruitment Officer. Recruitment Officer does the same thing, kind of. But it only costs 1 mana. I mean, sure, it costs 1 more for the ability, but it's going to let you get bigger things, especially since it's mana value 3 or less, whereas this is power 2 or less. I just think that Recruitment Officer is basically doing the same thing, but better. So I'm going to give it a 1. Strongbox Raider, 2 red for a 5/2. When it enters, if you attacked, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one, and until the end of your next turn, you can play that card. Because you can play it until the end of your next turn, I think that does make it more valuable, but still, I would only probably put this as like a 1.5. I think some budget pirate decks might kind of like it, but I don't really see too much use for it. Treetop Snare Spinner. 3 and a green for a 1/4 reach death touch, and then you can pay 2 and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. It's a 1. It doesn't really seem that good to me. Uncharted Voyage. 3 and a blue. Target creature's owner puts it on their choice of the top or bottom of their library, and then you surveil 1. I don't think this is very good. I'm going to put it at a 1. The fact that your opponent can just put it back on top and then recast it their next turn, yeah, I don't like that. So I just don't think it's that strong. And I'm just going to put it at a 1. Vanguard Seraph, 3 and a white for 3/3. Whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, surveil 1, and it has flying. We already have that card that draws when you gain life for the first turn, basically. So this is just that, but worse. So I'm going to put it at a 2. There's probably some deck that wants this, life gain angels, whatever. Wardens of the Cycle, very romantic. Honestly, I fuck with it. They're very cute. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, choose 1. You either gain 2 life or you draw 1 and lose a life. So I think the fact that you get to do it every turn, an extra draw can be good, but it's just not that great. I'm going to give it a 1. Zimone, Paradox Sculptor. It's a 4-mana 1/4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 creatures you control, and then you can play green and blue, tap it, and double the number of each kind of counter on up to 2 target creatures and or artifacts you control. I'm going to give this a 7. I don't know entirely how powerful it is, but being able to either double the counters on a creature is really good, or if you're playing something like Helix Pinnacle, or I guess Simic Ascendancy would work, or the 1,000-Year Calendar, whatever. Those cards that put a bunch of counters on themselves, and once they reach a certain number of counters, you win the game. This is the kind of deck for that. So I'm going to give it a 7. I think it's definitely a fun build. Arcane Epiphany. This spell costs 1 less if you control a wizard. Otherwise, it's a 5-mana draw 3. If you control a wizard, it's a 4-mana draw 3. I just don't think it's worth it. I think there's better ways to draw 3, probably. I'm going to put it at a 1. I think it's kind of bad. Archmage of Runes. 3 blue, 3/6. Instants and sorceries cost 1 less, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, draw a card. So, if we look at this, this is Archmage of... So if we look at Archmage Emeritus, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, draw a card. This doesn't count when you copy, so it could technically be worse, but this is 1 more mana for an extra power and 4 extra toughness, and instants and sorceries cost 1 less. So I would say it's kind of just a better Archmage of Emeritus. Again, unless copying spells is part of your shtick. So I would probably put it at a 5. I think it's pretty good. There's a lot of things you can do by drawing cards whenever you cast spells, so... Armasaur Guide. 4 and a white for a 4/4. Vigilance. When you attack with 3 or more creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It's a 1. It's bad. Banner of Kinship. 5 mana. When it enters, choose a creature type. This artifact enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact. So, if it enters and you have 8 goblins, you put 8 fellowship counters on it, and then all your goblins get +8/+8. I would say it's pretty good, especially for go wide types of decks. Yeah, I would give this like a 7. I think it's probably an auto include for any sort of typal deck. which is why I have to give it a 7. Blasphemous Edict. So each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. It costs 3 black black, but you can pay black rather than pay its spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. Even at 3 black black, it's probably one of the best board wipes. Because if you take something like Wrath of God or whatever, there are creatures that have indestructible. There are creatures that are going to find a way to get around it. The fact that they have to sacrifice is definitely going to make it harder to get around. Plus, if you have something that gets triggers off of sacrifices, Blasphemous Edict would be great for that. And I mean, I guess technically too, if you went really wide with a tokens deck, you could sacrifice 13 tokens and leave like important pieces of your board intact. So I'm gonna give it like an 8. I really like it, honestly. Bloodthirsty Conqueror. 3 black black, flying death touch. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. This is Exquisite Blood. This is Exquisite Blood. Basically, any of those creatures that say, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses 1 life, and this go infinite. So I would say it's very good, especially for 5 mana. I'm gonna give it a 7. It basically goes in any life gain deck. It goes infinite super easily. So yeah, definitely a 7. Claws Out. 3 white white. It costs 1 less for each cat you control, and creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. So if you're playing a cat deck, it's going to be white white, and that gives your creatures +2/+2 until end of turn. I think it's fun, but I don't think it's very good. I think any other overrun effect is probably going to be better, especially if you're playing like the original Erebos. You'll have like stampedes and shit, so I'm just going to give it a 1.5. It's not really bad. It's just definitely outclassed. Like Overwhelming Stampede, anything like that. Dragon Trainer. When it enters, you create a 4/4 dragon with flying, and it's a 5 mana 1/1. So it puts 5 power total on the board. Plus, if you have some way to flicker it, I guess it could be fairly good. I will give it a 1.5. Because again, unless you have some sort of deck, like maybe in Kiki Jiki, right? Kiki Jiki creates a copy of Dragon Trainer, you create another 4/4, and it expands your board. I guess it could be kind of good, but I think there are just generally better things you can be doing with it, so yep. Elfsworn Giant. Whenever a land you control enters, create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. It's a 5 mana 5/3 with reach. I'm going to give this a 3. I think creating elves on landfall is pretty solid. That's a good ability, so probably about a 3. It costs too much for that to be worth it. You take like Scute Swarm. Scute Swarm, sure, it has worse stats, but it's 3 mana, creates a 1/1 insect on landfall, and if you have 8 or more lands, creates a copy of itself. Or it might be 6 or more lands. It's either 6 or 8. But either way, that's just going to be doing a lot more for a lot less mana. But it's definitely not bad. Gorehorn Raider. So 5 mana 4/4. When it enters, if you attacked this turn, it deals 2 damage to any target. This is a 1. It's bad. High Society Hunter. 5 mana 5/3. Flying. When it attacks, you can sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And whenever a non-token creature dies, draw a card. I'm going to put this at a 6. I think the non-token creature dying, drawing you a card, is really good, because that can be your opponent's creatures too. So, like, about a 6. I think it's really good. Icewind Elemental, sorry. 5 mana 3/4. When it enters, draw, then discard. Kind of sucks, it's a 1. Incinerating Blast. 5 mana, deals 6 damage to target creature, then you can discard. If you do, you draw. It's a 1. It's bad removal. It's really bad. Like, I never want to pay 5 mana for my removal. That's just never going to be worth it. I don't care if it loots. I don't care if it creates a treasure. I want to be paying 1, 2, maybe 3 mana for my removal, right? If I'm paying 3 mana, it better hit everything. It better be like Beast Within, Generous Gift, Stroke of Midnight doesn't hit lands, but I would say Stroke of Midnight's up there. You know, it has to do something like that. Or it has to be like Tear Asunder could cost 4, but I could pay 2 and destroy or exile an artifact or enchantment. You know, you have to make it worth it, and Incinerating Blast is not worth it, so it's a 1. Luminous Rebuke. Costs 3 less if it targets tapped creature. It's a 5 mana destroy target creature. I mean, you can't guarantee that your opponents will tap a creature, but at that point, it's just a 2. I'll give it a 2. It's not bad. But again, if you're playing... No, I'm giving it a 1, because if you're playing white, you have Swords to Plowshares, you have Path to Exile, you have Generous Gift, you have all that shit. So you're better off just playing any of that over Luminous Rebuke. Needletooth Pack, 3 green, 4/5. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. 2 counters every turn cycle is okay, but I still just don't see it being very useful, so I'll give it a 1. Skyship Buccaneer, 3 blue. When it enters, if you attack this turn, draw a card. Nobody cares. It's a 1. It's bad. Tragic Banshee, 5 mana, 5/3. When it enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. If a creature died this turn, that creature gets -13/-13. So this is Tragic Slip. If you haven't seen Tragic Slip, it's one of the best black removal spells. It does the exact same thing, but for 1 mana, right? If they made this a 3 mana creature that had the same ability, but it was a 2/3, maybe I could see it having some play, right? If this was a 2 mana creature, same ability, but it was a 1/1, I could see it having some play. It's the fact that you have to pay 5 mana for it. Utter garbage. I would put it at like a 1. Twin Flame Tyrant, 3 red, 3/5, flying. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or permanent to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. So, you know, your Lightning Bolt deals 6 damage now. I think these damage doublers are always, like, pretty solid, you know. Things like Sulfim, they're, like, decks built around them. So I would say it's about a... I'll put it at a 5. To, like, make my scale more clear, 1 is I don't see any decks that should ever play it, and a 10 is, like, Sol Ring. Sol Ring is a 10. Every deck that can play Sol Ring should play Sol Ring, because Sol Ring is that good. So if I give something about a 5, there's good use cases for it. You could probably splash it in a couple decks, but it's not like this card is really, really good or anything like that. Valkyrie's Call, 3 white enchantment. Whenever a non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter. It has flying and is an angel. So it gives everything that you have that's non-token and not an angel a second life, basically. I would say this is pretty good. I would give this around a 5. Again, like, if you're playing a deck with board wipes and shit, being able to bring your whole board back after a board wipe, I think is pretty solid. And I guess the other thing you could do, if you had, like, 9 Lives Familiar, which is a card that comes out in this set, 9 Lives Familiar comes back. Let me just pull it up real quick to make sure I'm not stupid. So when it dies, if it had a revival counter on it, return it to the battlefield with 1 fewer revival counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. So unless I'm reading this incorrectly, you could sack it once, have it come back as an angel, sack it again once it's an angel, and it'll come back because of its ability with 1 less revival counter. So you'll get like an extra sacrifice each time, but I could be wrong. Either way, I think just being able to bring back your board like that is pretty good. So I'm going to give it a 6, actually. I changed my mind. Vampire Soul Caller. Flying, can't block, When it enters, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And it's a 5 mana 3/2. Hell nah. That's a 1. That's shit. Apothecary Stomper. 6 mana 4/4 Vigilance. When it enters, you choose one, and you either gain 4 life or put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. Is a 1. Arbiter of Woe. 6 mana 5/4. As an additional cost to it, sacrifice a creature. When it enters, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. You draw a card and gain 2 life. Okay. It's very flickerable. Because I think making your opponents discard and you draw every time you flicker it is pretty good. Especially you only have to pay the sacrifice cost when you cast it. So I guess I could see some sort of flickering with it, but even then there's just better creatures. So, why would you play this when you could play like Grey Merchant of Asphodel or something like that? I'm going to give it a 1.5 because I could see some sort of use for it, but it ain't going any higher than that. Curator of Destinies. The spell can't be countered. Flying. When it enters, look at the top 5 of your library and separate them into a face-up and a face-down pile. An opponent chooses one of those piles. Put that pile in your hand and the rest into your graveyard. The fact that the other pile goes into your graveyard, I think, is actually pretty good. However, I just don't think for 6 mana it's worth it. So I'm gonna put it at like a 3. I'll put it at a 4. I think there are decks that can definitely take advantage of cards either being in the graveyard or in your hand. And I mean, depending on how it goes, you're getting at least 2 cards in hand either way. Probably, if you separate it 2 and 3. I mean, you could separate it 1 and 4. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just going to give it a 4. I'm not going to think about it too much. Grappling Kraken. 6 mana 5/6, landfall. Whenever land you control enters, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. I think the stun counter makes this worth it, kind of. However, it's just like a little bit too much mana than I think I'm willing to pay for this. I mean, like, yeah, I just don't think I can fully justify it, so I'm going to put it at 2. Guarded Air. 6 mana, 1/1. When it enters, create 2 3/3s, and it has lifelink. This is, again, very flickerable. I think putting 6 power in whenever you flicker it is maybe worth it. I'm going to give it a 3, just because I can see it in flicker decks, but I don't really see it anywhere else. I think, I'll give it a 2. It could be in, like, budget flicker decks. Niv Mizzet, Visionary. 6 mana, 5/5. You have no maximum hand size. Flying. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards. It goes infinite with himself, kind of. You take Niv Mizzet, Draco Genius, and whenever it deals damage to a player, you draw a card. And then this says whenever deals not... Oh, wait. Never mind. Sorry. Wrong one. Niv Mizzet Faroon. Whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target. And then this one says whenever you deal non-combat damage to an opponent, you draw that many cards. So you deal 1 damage to an opponent with this one. Then you draw a card because of this one, which leads you to deal 1 damage because of this one. And then you can dish out like 80 damage or so, around the board. Also goes infinite with Niv Mizzet Firemind. This is the other one. Yeah, I think the fact that it goes infinite with a different version of itself is funny. And I'm going to give it a 6 for that. No, I'm going to give it an 8 for that. Because now that I'm thinking about this deck would be really fun. Use like Price of Progress and some of those like funky older burners. Like deals damage to each player equal to twice the number of non-basic lands that player controls. So, let's just say each opponent has 4 non-basic lands. You will then draw 24 cards. Yup. Like, it's insane how many cards you could draw off of this. So for that, I'm giving it an 8. I really like it. Quake Strider Ceratops, 6 mana, 12/8. Yup. I'm giving it a 3. There's definitely some sort of deck that wants this. Yeah. That's all that can be said, really. It's a 6 mana, 12/8. Yeah. Quilled Great Worm. 6 mana, 7/7, trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many counters on it, and then you may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among other creatures you control in addition to paying its other costs. I feel like there's some way to go infinite where you, like, you use Greater Good to sacrifice it to draw 7 cards, and then, oh yeah, that's easy. You take that, where's that bird that we looked at earlier? Where's the bird? Where's the bird? Where is the bird? We just looked at this bird. Oh, there we go. So whenever you draw a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So then we would sacrifice Quilled Great Worm to draw 7 cards, put 7 +1/+1 counters on Sky Mage because we drew 7 cards. And then we would remove 6 counters from it in order to, but you still have to pay its other costs. So you'd also need infinite mana, but I mean, there's like somewhere you could go with that. Right up, it's a 5. Rite of the Dragon Caller. 4 red, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, create a 5/5 red dragon. Any sort of Spellslinger deck is gonna want this, that like needs a payoff for their spell slinging. I would just give this like a 6. I think it's really good for Spellslinger decks. I think it's really interesting. You do also have to think about it, though. This is going in competition with Arcane Bombardment, which doesn't look like much, but when you cast your first instant or sorcery each turn, you exile a random instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and then you take each card that's been exiled with it, and you get to cast them for free. These are both the same cost, and honestly, most of the time, I want Arcane Bombardment more. So, I'm going to bump this back down to a 5. Chandra Flameshaper. Add red. So it's a 7 mana, 6 loyalty planeswalker, +2 to add red, and exile the top 3 cards of your library. Choose one. You may play that card this turn. You can +1 create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this token, and you can -4 it to deal 8 damage divided as you choose among any number of creatures or planeswalkers. I think for 7 mana, I want her to be doing more than this. I mean, like, she's probably not getting removed super fast because she doesn't really do all that much. Like, oh, you get 3 mana and something from your library, or you get a copy of something. Like, I'm gonna give her a 2. I really don't see how useful any of this is. I mean, 8 damage divided among stuff could, like, kill a couple things, but it just seems underwhelming for 7 mana. Like, I could be winning the game for 7 mana. Not gaining some advantage, I guess. Herald of Eternal Dawn. 4 white, 6/6, flash, flying. You can't lose the game, and your opponent can't win the game. So this is Platinum Angel, but better? I mean, sure, you have to make sure you have enough white for that, but it's a higher statted Platinum Angel with flash. I'm gonna give it a 4. I think it's kind of gimmicky, but I really like that. So I like it a lot more than it is useful. I'm gonna give it a 4. I think there's gonna be a lot of decks playing it just because it's cool. Um, I think that's fair. This one, Coma World Eater. 7 mana, 8/12, can't be countered, trample, ward 4. Ward 4 is basically hexproof, let's be real here. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you create 4 3/3 blue serpent creature tokens named Coma's Coil. This card's fucking ridiculous, alright? So when it swings in, you put 12 additional power on the board if it connects. Which it probably will because A, it's an 8/12, so it's probably not dying to combat. And it's probably not dying to removal because Ward 4, even if your opponent casts, let's just say, Doomblade, right? Their Doomblade costs 6 now. They've wasted an entire turn removing this thing, and you're in green-blue. You'll bring this shit back next turn. Alright? This card is sick. And not in a good way. This thing is horrifying. Yeah. I'm gonna give this an 8. Any big green-blue creature deck wants this shit. And it's a really strong card. It's definitely very stompy strong. This isn't like a big, ooh, I've got this big brain combo going on. This is, my creature hit the board, they attack you once, I win the game. And there's something to be said about that. Preposterous Proportion, 7 mana, creatures you control gain +10/+10 in vigilance until end of turn. The fact it doesn't give them trample kind of hurts, but there's squirrels in the art, because any deck that can go wide with something like squirrels probably really likes having their whole board become 10/10s. Especially because this might not seem like, oh, well, they can just be chump blocked, right? But even if they are chump blocked, as long as you get 4 creatures in, if you can get 4 creatures unblocked, that's 40 damage. That wins you the game. I guess it being a sorcery does hurt it because you can't, like, surprise your opponent with it. But either way, I think there's definitely a good amount of decks that could use this. So I'm going to put it at about a 5. This motherfucker. Scion of 7 Deaths. It's a 7 mana, 7/7, first strike, vigilance, menace, trample, reach, lifelink, ward, pay 7 life. This thing is a monster. So I think ward, pay 7 life doesn't matter as much in Commander. You could still, like, that's 1/7 of a player's life total. It sucks, but the whole table is going to thank you for removing it. And even once it does hit the battlefield, I mean, sure, trample, lifelink, menace is a little bit scary. First strike, vigilance, like it's going to be hard to deal with in combat, but even then, 7 damage really isn't that insane. It doesn't have infect, it doesn't have, flying, so I mean, it could definitely still, like, die in combat. I'm going to put it at a 5. I don't think it's as strong as I've heard some people say, but it's definitely cool. And that is it. That's it. That's the last card. I have done it. I have looked at all of the cards in, this is all of the new cards in Foundations. My bad. Foundations is looking to be a really interesting set. Some of the art is really cool. I really fuck with the alternate art for Sire of 7 Deaths. How it's, like, aligned in the text, I think is cool as shit. This Progenitus looks like a custom card I would have made when I was, like, 7 years old on, like, MTG Cardsmith. There's a lot of really cool art. There's a lot of really cool cards coming out here. I'm really hoping it's going to bring down the prices on some cards. But yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting product. They're going to be in standard for 5 years. So some of these cards, I don't really know how standard players are going to feel about them. Some of them honestly seem kind of annoying. But it's going to be interesting nonetheless to see how this all shakes out, what kind of decks come out of this, things like that. Um, that being said, I'm MTG Man. Like, subscribe, all that shit. If y'all ever think of like other music for me to play, you should tell me. Hip Shop has literally been the only song that's like ever made sense for my channel. Cause there's so much music that's like, it feels like I should be giving a motivational speech. Bro, who the fuck being loud out there? Or like just lame shit. So this is like the best I've had. Anywho, let me know in the comments what you're thinking about foundations. Do you want me to build any of these commanders? Things like that. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.